So it's my pleasure to moderate this last session, and we're calling it the Dragon's Den. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the top 3 barriers and the top 3 actions that were discussed at each one of the breakout sessions, and we're going to allow this group to debate them, discuss them, potentially disagree with each other with the suggestions, and hear what these people have to say. So let me introduce to you, Rod Muir is at the end. Now Rod, we're very glad that he's here because he maybe got some food poisoning last night and hasn't been feeling very well. So if you have to exit stage left, we understand. Rod is the National Waste Diversion and Sustainability Campaigner for the Sierra Club of Canada. Next, oh no, not next. In the middle is Bernie Magnanen, the Chief Economist and Assistant Managing Director for the Vancouver Board of Trade. We also have Neil Hasty right here, President and CEO of NCorp Pacific Canada. Paul LeBlanc, the Vice President of Building Owners and Managers Association of BC. And Colin Isaac, Principal of the CIAL Group, an Ontario-based sustainability consulting group. So what we tried to do was ask experts in different areas to come forward and have hopefully a lively debate here. Now they walked around and they listened to your, which we have to say, I think I've talked to all of them, the very lively discussions that happened in each one of the breakout rooms were sensational. The time was tight, but you jumped right into it and started debating and looking for ideas. So I'm just going to be reading out the barriers and the actions, and then we're going to open it up for a conversation on what we heard. So on the organic side that happened in here, the 3 barriers. First, public doesn't accept separating organics. 2, lack of public education and understanding. And 3, lack of organics infrastructure. So those are the 3 barriers that the group identified. The actions, number 1, developers ensure space for organics or for kitchen scraps programs. 2, Metro Vancouver to site and build facilities. And 3, business, residents, schools, and haulers to educate and enforce diversion. Now, Rod, I know you talk a lot about organics, and you speak all over North America about this. What do you think about those 3 barriers and actions? And if you have to refer to them, we have them down here in front of us. Are they similar here as they are in other places? Are there some barriers that we've missed or some actions that we've missed?
I can't say I've been involved enough in these to say whether these are particularly common. They're certainly in my 10 years of doing this. It's certainly not the first time I've heard this. But those of you who have heard me speak know that I talk a lot about the importance of separation and the fact that it was separate to start with. And if you'll just indulge me for a moment, I did bring some props to keep things entertaining. You didn't buy it like this, right? Nobody went to a store and bought a banana, cell phone, can of beans. Right? You bought a can of beans separately, you bought a cell phone separately, you bought a banana separately, you consumed them separately, and all we're asking folks to do is keep them separate. It was separate to start with. Greg, seems I'm off to a rousing start. I seem to have overcome my sickness too. I don't feel so bad.
We should have had you speak in the morning.
I can tell you what sushi place not to eat at downstairs.
But let me take that.
You didn't buy it this way. This should be the only message we need to convey to the people of Metro Vancouver. You didn't buy it this way. It was separate to start with. All we're asking you to do is flick your wrist, find a green bin, find a blue bin, what have you. Go ahead, Greg, sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I know Rod's talked about all the technology we need is right here. This bin, or that bin. But Paul, some of the barriers that we saw and some of the actions that we need to do is around buildings and design of buildings and managing different or looking after that. Where do you see some of the challenges there? Or are we bang on with what we're saying?
Well, I'm sure I'm not going to argue with that statement, but when you're putting up a building, there's a lot of factors, economic being number 1, I think, and design factors too for health and safety and ensuring that what you build is represents what the tenants who are paying for the space want. Everything else is are add-ons, and I guess how you treat organics, I honestly don't know. I can tell you the industry generally is very, very receptive to recycling in all forms. We, for our industry, have been recycling paper and cardboard for well over 2 decades. We do it on a voluntary basis, but it's an industry-wide accepted program through our industry association. We just expanded it last year to include electronics, organics, and other products. We're moving towards zero waste management. We're doing it for the industry. But there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of barriers, and not everybody can participate. So what the answer is, I'm not sure.
One of the ones that I find interesting here is number 2 in the actions, Metro Vancouver to site and build facilities. I'm not sure if that's because this is a room of people that are engaged in that topic, but I'm not sure if that really matters to the resident, where it goes at the end of the day. As long as it goes to the curb and someone takes it away, and if they can do it more environmentally friendly, that's great. But, you know, maybe Bernie, you can talk from a business perspective?
Maybe we can save some money here. We save one truck from being on the road and one bin from being on the side of the, well, you sort of need that because you need that for the green waste. But the household organics, there's a low-cost infrastructure product that's already out there. It's called a garburator.
Yeah.
Okay? Think about that. You have a waste stream already going out of your house. It gets treated at the treatment plant, liquid treatment plant, right? So there's one alternative for your household green waste. Now, can I take it all? Well, I don't know. I'm not an expert in carburetors. I don't know. You can put chicken bones down there, and banana peels and egg shells and whatever you want. So think about that. You talk about smelly and not wanting to touch it. There's one option for you to consider. And by the way, that would mean that you'd save money too about not having to build as many sites and facilities, which is a cost to us as a taxpayer, both residents and business. So think about that.
Well, there's some good thoughts there. Paul?
I wouldn't buy a share in a company that makes carburetors, to be honest. You know, there's an old saying that dilution is not the solution to pollution. And a carburetor is basically diluting the organics and then trying to get them back out again. There are situations where a carburetor may make some sense, but for every household to have one, forget it. I'd make a couple of other comments too on these barriers and actions. On barrier number 1, I don't agree that the public doesn't accept separating organics. I think it's true, number 2, they don't understand it, but I think they want to do it as much as they want to recycle. So I wouldn't buy number 1. And I would agree on action number 2. I don't know why it has to be government that does everything. I mean, government does have a role, but the private sector can play a pretty important role in this too. For example, we do the independent environmental analysis for President's Choice green products that you can buy at Real Canadian Superstores. And I don't want to give a commercial for those.
I think you just did, though.
Well, I probably did. But the President's Choice green leaf and yard compost is compost produced by the private sector from yard waste that is collected from households in communities in various parts of the country, is composted at a private sector facility and is sold to you in a private sector store. We don't have to invest in our governments, which means greater taxes, to do more and more for the environment. There is a role for the private sector to play, and I think source-separated organics is one area where the private sector can play a pretty important role.
Well, and we've seen it here in Metro Vancouver.
Absolutely.
To date, we see, Harvest Power, Richmond Fiber and Soil has provided that solution for us.
Yep.
And we see that Metro Vancouver, by putting deadlines in place into the future, we see government playing a role, but we also see the private sector playing a role in knowing that there's going to be the feedstock in the future for them to actually be able to go to the capital markets to get investment.
Exactly.
But
Well, I'm going to disagree with
absolutely.
about the carburetor and about dilution.
So just like Dragon's Den, you're going to put your money into the carburetor company.
Well, no, I'm not going to put it in the carburetor company. I'm going to put it in the company at the end of the line that's processing all that stuff and getting revenue from heat.
Well, that's taxes, because
production.
we do that.
But hold on a second. No, that's not taxes. That's revenue, so that you don't have to increase the taxes.
There you go. No, I think that, well, and absolutely, and Metro Vancouver is doing that, which is, I think, a good point.
It's looking to do that, but we have differences of opinion on how it can be best be
I think the
done.
last country needs to be heard from, Greg.
Sure.
Yeah.
A final note before we get on to the next topic.
I'm not as invested in yuck as my colleagues are, and so I give them a lot of credit. But the one thing I did notice was missed here, and terms of the top 3 actions, and they were in all the other sessions, and that was there was no faith in market-based instruments. There was no faith that the market, through pricing, could in fact help generate an interest and a demand for organics. That's the only thing I would comment that, I mean, the other things look to be pretty useful, and it may have been that the market question, because I know they had trouble with the voting system in the organic session, so maybe the market thing fell off because the technology failed too, but I think the market component could be an interesting add to those actions.
I think that's a good note to end on, because I don't think we would disagree with that one. All right, stream number 2 was multifamily, and the top 3 barriers there was the anonymity of multifamily living, so not knowing who puts what into where and being able to identify who was the problem, lack of mandatory 3Rs bylaws, and the need to continue education on 3Rs. So those are the barriers. And the third one is especially with Metro Vancouver and the lots of cultures and languages that make up our societies. The actions, though, develop education and engagement toolkit for builders. So put something together that they can take and implement, and don't try to get each building to reinvent the wheel there. Activate residents, champions for recycling within communities. We saw an example of that this morning at in Westminster, community champions taking a lead. And the last action was dramatically increase garbage fees and lower recycling fees. So to let somewhat where you were getting at there, Neil, and let the market or the financial incentive drive this a little bit. So why don't we start on that note again?
A bias that I have is that I think one of the unappreciated tactics that can be used when you're trying to shift social behavior is our good old friend shaming. And as I was listening into a couple of conversations, and nobody will use that word, they like to call it public education or attitude shifting, but fundamentally I was listening with an ear that said, we have to bring attention to the champions, which in the alternative says, we've really got to point out the poor performers, and through good old-fashioned shaming, in other words, in a multi-family building, in the lobby, instead of putting up the notice about the AGM that's coming up, you should have a picture of the owner of the suite that you know is using the chute and isn't doing the right thing in terms of recycling. So I think there's a lot of potential there, Greg. And politicians, I know, are particularly adept at that. So there would be a natural fit here for Metro Vancouver.
Okay. I think the other way to spin that is to say, instead of shaming people, hold up the people that are doing a good job. So we're looking at that in Port Coquitlam to put gold stars on people's bins that have gone to a smaller bin and put it out every 6 weeks, instead of the person that's got the garbage overflowing and putting a big black X on their bin. Although we did do that a little bit with Bearware. But Bernie, you seem to be...
Yeah, I agree with you, Greg. It's really, it's been proven time and again that carrots work a lot better than sticks. And the carrots of, here's the gold star, and people say, hey, how come they got the gold star? I don't like them. I'm going to beat them. So that's the type of thing you need to have if you're going to do it. Sticks, they work after a fashion, but nowhere near as effectively as carrots.
Colin?
Yeah, I agree that let's get on the positive side. I mean, let's have an awards program for the building that achieves the greatest waste reduction. And those kinds of things, so that people are motivated by the positive. You know, when you get to 80% participation rates, then maybe you look at a little bit of shaming of the few. But when you're at 27% participation rates, it's got to be positive. You got to reinforce good actions. And by the way, if I were a municipal politician, which I used to be when the dinosaurs walked the earth, I'd run like hell away from number 3. Because I wouldn't get re-elected if I dramatically raised garbage fees. I mean, eventually, yeah, it's got to be done. But for the time being, let's find a way to lower costs, lower taxes for those who are doing the right thing, rather than announcing a great increase in an area that is still going to hurt 70% of the people. We've got to focus on the positive, at least for now.
If we do enough recycling, You won't need to. You can raise the garbage fees, but you still won't be paying
Yeah,
as much.
absolutely, but far too many governments are charging extra for recycling and not charging extra for waste disposal, for landfilling, and that's insanity. I mean, Ontario does that. We've got it absolutely backwards. We should be charging like hell for those who, particularly the commercial and institutional landfillers, those you can charge more, and reducing the costs for the people who are doing a good job of recycling and composting.
Okay, so I have to go to Paul because he's representing the building owners. So that would be, and I'm going to give you the last word on this one because we got to move on to the next topic.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment on Bernie's carrot and stick approach. What you're talking about is regulations versus incentives. And you know, I can tell you from representing a business point of interest, regulations are fully supported where needed for issues dealing with health and safety. When it gets to what I call social engineering, that's the human behavior side of things you want to change, there's not the same level of support. And that's where you know, you really got to look carefully at how you're going to affect change in that area. No question, incentives, call it a carrot, but incentives work. And so going back to what you heard here, definitely that if one of the biggest barriers is, oh sorry, it was the previous one, I'm trying to catch up to you here, but getting people to want to do this, branding them, labeling them, all those things, and giving them some kind of reward, whether it's recognition or financial, you've got to do that kind of thing.
Perfect. All right, let's move on to oh, Rod, you wanted to jump in there? Sure.
I just want to make a quick point. If we can get people to eat at McDonald's, we can get them to do anything.
Well, and on that note, I think one of the themes that we've seen here is if we make it convenient and cost-effective, people will do it. And that's McDonald's. Convenient, cost-effective, and we've talked about that throughout all of this.
There's a convenience issue. A lot of people are starting out like this. This is a pain in the ass, and there isn't a lot of benefits. What we need to start saying to people is it's really not that difficult. It was separate to start with, and then start hammering away at all the benefits. And someone who lives in an apartment, doesn't drive, usually doesn't have control over their heat. So diverting their waste is really the only means they have of achieving sustainability. This is all they can do. And it's what we should be focusing on.
Excellent.
Thanks,
and on
Greg.
that note, let's go to stream number 3, which is construction and demolition. The 3 barriers: no regulations required for deconstruction and waste diversion. 2, lack of existing diversion infrastructure. 3, lack of incentive for diversion and low disposal costs. The 3 actions: provide more incentive for deconstruction. 2, local governments require contractors to work with licensed recycling facilities. And 3, promote reuse of salvage material through building code, for example. So, Paul, why don't we start with you on the building side of things here, because it seems to be a lot about the construction there and more regulation than anything.
Well, I think the first one is incentive. So but all 3 of those ideas look good to me. What can I say? Great ideas, good work.
Well, we can leave it at that. Colin?
Yeah, I agree with all of these, but I want to add one other. For far too long, we've used builders as demolition contractors. And why would a guy who wants to build new buildings be an expert in how to deconstruct buildings and reuse the pieces? I mean, the reality is all a builder wants to do is to knock the place down as quickly as possible in order that he can start doing his job of putting up the new building. I remember back when I was a kid, and they still do it today, they have TV shows about blowing up buildings. I mean, what a huge waste of material when we do it that way. What I'm beginning to see emerge now, which I think is really exciting, is a whole range of companies coming on stream who specialize in deconstructing buildings. That's what they do. They don't build new ones. And I think we need to give incentives to that industry to get them going so that we have a whole range of private sector out there who are experts in pulling down buildings piece by piece so that all the pieces can be reused. And that's where I'd put my money.
Well, and we saw a great example of that with the City of Vancouver, working with that nonprofit today, and getting underprivileged youth to work. It was just phenomenal.
I was going to say that because that's one of the areas that we have a problem with is in terms of how kids get involved with crime. If we can get them jobs, if we can get them into situations where they can have a real job, where they can be contributing to society and to themselves and to their own self-esteem, which is one of the biggest issues they face. And doing something like deconstruction, which especially guys like to pull things apart, right? We like to pull things apart and wreck them.
But we do like to blow things up,
We
too.
do that too. We do that too. But if you're working in a car, you don't want an old car. You don't want to blow it up. What you want to do is take it apart piece by piece to make sure that you can put it back together in the right way.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's important, and that's a good example. And we should champion those, and we should work to try and help to build that kind of industry so that it no longer necessarily needs to be a non-profit, but can be for-profit, and they can employ these people, especially those who are looking for work or need work. It's one avenue that we can help deal with some of our issues, some of the social issues we have in terms of unemployment in the uneducated.
Absolutely.
Greg, I would say that Metro Vancouver can hit a home run with this one. It's got the characteristics where a local government can be extremely successful. There aren't many generators, contrasted with multifamily. There's a lot of market value in the materials, and that's a dynamic combination that I think this is when, of course, this will move a lot of tons, and you're trying to move tons. Sometimes I think you hide behind these tons and forget about the packaging tons, but that's for another discussion. So I think that Metro is in a position to hit a home run on this by moving aggressively in this area.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, and we'll get to that one. We're not hiding behind it. Any last comments on this? I want to try to go on to the next one. I know we went through this one quickly, but our time's ticking quick. So next one is business and institutional. The three barriers that were identified were lack of enforcement, perception that costs are too high, and lack of education. The three actions: provide incentive programs from government and business, internal education by business sector and government, and accelerate extended producer responsibility. So, how do we get, we heard from Earls this morning of what they're doing. We heard from London Drugs about what they're doing. Bernie, you're in this sector. Are we on track here, or are we missing something, or should we regulate more?
You know what? I knew you'd start with me anyway. So I think it's something that an organization like ours, the Vancouver Board of Trade, could wade in on something like this in terms of educating our members and getting them to understand that there's benefit to be had by recycling. And it needs to be done, and there's not enough knowledge out there. London Drugs has done a great job, but as Clint mentioned, they have a corporate philosophy which comes from a private family that were driven to go this way. They respect the environment. As part of the respect of the environment, we have to teach our businesses and institutions that one of the best ways is to get on the recycling bandwagon. And that's the way we have to do it. I think, again, it's a carrot rather than a stick. It's education, I think, is very, very important. Enforcement, where they really go bad, they go off the tracks. But again, like in the condo situation, the Strata Council situation, let's get to know who the stars are. Mm-hmm. And let's celebrate the stars in this area, and especially in certain industries, then we can cajole the other people in that industry to try and match that level. The biggest barrier faced, which isn't there, is competitiveness. And that is, if you are in an industry where you have 5 or 6 major competitors, you do not want to be the person investing what is perceived to be an investment and an additional cost to your business, which will mean that you may or may not have to raise your prices, or your profit will go down, and your competitors will steal a march on you. And that's what London Drugs was facing, and they made the decision that we're going to do it anyway. And what happened was not what you would have thought. Their costs didn't go up, they did, but they made so much in savings from paying for disposal, not having to pay for disposal, that it more than offset the cost of actually putting those programs into place. So that's the myth that we have to make sure, or the lesson that we have to make sure gets taught to business.
Rod?
Greg, Mayor Moore, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. You can call me Greg, it's fine.
There are a few other topics that frustrate me more than this one. And that's because of this artificial separation between residential and IC&I. You know, it's not as though we caffeinate someone else, put them in a tie, and send them off to work in the morning, right? It's us. And the fact of the matter is, diversion activities that you're conducting at home, you should be able to do at work. You should be able to do here at the hotel. You should be able to do at Vancouver Place. You should be able to do it at your school. I think we've got to get around this idea that these waste streams, that the people generating these waste streams are somehow different. They're not. It's us. It's always us. It's always going to be us.
Good point. Neil?
I want to build on Bernie's comment. What I'm seeing happening in an example was London Drugs, and I think it will flow over into this sector, and that is that the major retailers are really taking on clearly the opportunity to drive forward on sustainability, and as a consequence of that, extended producer responsibility and or recycling and or diversion are the wind that fills those sails. So I think in terms of the institutions that you're needing to find leadership from, I think you're likely to get more and more leadership than we have historically in the past. Although I wanted to make mention that when I was in the room on IC&I, it was one of the few rooms where I looked around and a number of the participants had that deer in the headlight look to it. And I suspect they were from the business community because the signal to them was either higher taxes or higher fees or more regulation. And so I think there is going to need to be a pretty significant outreach, and Bernie's referenced that, so you don't get this kind of dramatic pushback from the business community.
Perfect. Colin?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I'm disagreeing with Bernie or not, but on action number 1, when it says provide incentive programs, if incentive programs is code for subsidies, I'm against it. I know companies all across this country who are sitting back waiting for government to give them money to reduce their waste and to reduce their energy use, things which are going to be cost effective for the company even without a government subsidy. So there shouldn't be government subsidies because it delays action and it's taking money out of my pocket and transferring it through government to the industry, and I don't know why we need to do that. I would say provide some help to business and to government, provide some training programs, maybe even, hey, here's a self-serving idea, maybe even have a team of consultants who go around and talk to business and help them understand what they can be doing to reduce waste. But don't actually provide handouts to business. It's the wrong direction.
Colin?
Go to www.boardoftrade.com and you'll see where we have said we do not want government to increase their expenditures. Subsidies are not the way to go.
Okay.
They have to do it themselves. We have to, it's education, it's helping that whole education piece along. It's getting companies to realize that they can do it on an even basis. You get a reduced costs here, increased costs here, reduced costs here, and you can match the two so that the net impact is a wash.
Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I agree. You know, I don't see incentives as subsidies. I see them as providing tax credits, for example, for things that people do. But I also agree that I think the government has a role in helping the various industries and organizations that are trying to make this green economy work. So helping them out, not subsidizing their business, but helping them make it to just help them with their, whether it's tax breaks or whatever, help them deliver a service that we're all asking for.
Well, and just to end on that point, I agree, and I think that's why we're all in this room. It's not just government in this room trying to figure it out. We're all in this together to try to figure it out. And if we as the government have to come up and figure out case studies by working with, I'll just use Earls as an example, and then we work through the Board of Trade or Chamber of Commerce to say, hey, look at how much these guys saved, or it was a wash at the end of the day. Restaurant B, why don't you think about the same thing? Here's how to do it. Here's the best case, case studies, that sort of thing, to help educate. Because I think it's partially just they don't understand, and they're so busy making payroll at the end of the month, they don't have the opportunity to look to the next step of how to do this. Now, Rod, did you have something? I saw you pulling out a plastic bag. I was getting kind of concerned, but you're getting ready for the next one?
Ready for the next one.
Okay, I'll start with you then. So number 5, influencing product design, the 3 barriers. Lack of incentive to brand owners, planned obsolescence, disposal fees not reflective in product cost, and the 3 actions. Force producers to absorb EPR costs, match EPR costs with sustainable practices, and common global standards for products and packaging. Rod, we'll start off with you, and then we'll come down here.
When I first saw we were discussing this a couple of weeks ago, I did honestly think we'd put the cart in front of the horse, so to speak. I think rather than talking about products, what we need to be talking about more immediately is packaging, specifically. And certainly those children from this morning, were a godsend in terms of me communicating that message. Well, what we need, standardization of types. I'm a handyman myself. These are some screws I bought at my local hardware store, packed by the same company in 3 different kinds of material. PET, which is okay, PVC, which is the last thing you want to burn, and then the other one's not marked at all. So what we need is standardization of type, that if you know a certain product is always going to be packed in a certain material, and the means by which to recycle that. We need certainly limits on the amount of material, no more of these football fields of plastic around a little a memory chip. You spend $50 on it, the manufacturer thinks they're going to make you think you got your money's worth by giving you a square foot of plastic to go with it. That's worth about a nickel, right? This stuff is cheap, cheap, cheap. We need limits on the amount, and then of course the recycled content standard. And the only way we're going to get this is federally. Forget, every meeting I've ever been to, folks always talk about how the city can do something, how the province can do something. Forget about it. Our only hope is to stand as a nation and defend that 49th parallel and say, listen, if you're going to bring stuff in, it's got to be standardized type, got to have recycled content. That's the place to start, and worry about products later.
Thanks, Rod. Neil, and then...
Normally Rod and I agree, but on this one we don't. I think the train has already left the station when it comes to product redesign, but that's on probably a North American or more of a global scale. My own recommendation would not be to invest a huge amount of the credibility of Metro Vancouver in pursuing this particular initiative, because I don't think, one, that's going to make any difference. I think it makes you feel good, and that's great. The second thing, though, is that this movement is already underway. And it's underway because the large corporations, and people have talked about Walmart and also about Procter & Gamble, and then London Drugs is a more near-in example. That is the result of their opportunity to save money, their opportunity to get competitive advantage, and I don't really believe that it's going to make much difference is what Metro Vancouver does, notwithstanding the fact that you want to align yourself internationally, and that's helpful. There is a global packaging project underway currently. The thing that I noticed when I was in that one session, and it was the only session that I really picked this up, is that mostly the discussions were very respectful, and that's the Canadian way. We kind of respect each other's opinions. But there was this strain of suspicion about business that permeated that particular room, that business won't do it unless we regulate them to do it. The notion that force producers to absorb EPR costs, they already do. But do they pass them on to the consumer? Absolutely. That's what they do to all their costs. That's a red herring. It won't change anything at all. I think the goal is a good one, and that's to hold producers responsible for end-of-life management. I agree with that, but it's going to be passed on to the consumer. At the end of the day, don't be under the illusion that the producer is actually paying for it. All of us are paying for it. So just to summarize, I think this is one that's an interesting intellectual discussion, and those are great fun. But I don't think there's any traction behind the ability of Metro to really do much in this area, except to continue to try and be a leader in terms of the thought process, but not spend any money on trying to actually get it done.
Fair enough. Paul?
Well, I was just going to enter the debate as the only layperson probably in the room. I find it very frustrating as a homeowner and a recycler when I have to look at the bottom of the plastic containers and figure out whether a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 can go in the box or not. For heaven's sakes, standardize it. I agree with you. But I'd like to make a comment too in support of the other side of the argument on regulation. I can tell you from my experience, there are three things that make businesses, I guess, a little bit queasy about regulation. Number one, there is a cost factor. There's a cost to administer it, there's a cost to enforce it, and there's a cost to be in compliance. Secondly, there are always with regulations unintended consequences. And if you tie in regulations, say, to renovations and it's tied into the permit process, you could get things where people are dodging the permit process, going underground. Or worse, they could be saying, well, the hell with this, it's too difficult, too expensive, I'm just not going to renovate. And when you renovate properties and buildings, that generates more taxes, and it goes from there and all the rest. So there are incumbent consequences that sometimes get overlooked. The third thing I find as a salient characteristic about regulations is, what's the saying, death by 1,000 cuts? On its own, any one regulation may look innocuous, it may look no big deal on its own, but you add up regulations from federal government and every municipality or every ministry it has, provincial government and every ministry has, local government, regional governments, utilities, crown corporations, you name it. Businesses are regulated up to yin-yang. And I think my colleague here on the right, who's an economist, will tell you that too much regulation is too much red tape and it's not good for the economy.
Perfect. Colin?
Yeah, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Neil because I haven't disagreed with him yet. And I think there is a role for Metro Vancouver and for its constituent municipalities, and that's in the area of green procurement by government. I bet that Metro Vancouver and the municipalities buy hundreds of millions worth of stuff every year, and a lot of that stuff comes in way too much packaging. If Metro Vancouver and the municipalities said, we don't want that packaging, we won't buy from you unless you supply us without packaging or with very simple, easy to recycle packaging, it would start to have an impact on the businesses that supply governments as well as all of us as individuals. So I'd say pick up number 3, go for green procurement by the municipalities and have some results. It's been shown to work elsewhere. The second point I want to make is when we're talking EPR and all of those kinds of things by product designers and manufacturers, we got to make sure we do it right. To give you a quick example, back in, I think it was about 1990, industry and the federal government agreed on something called the National Packaging Protocol. And the National Packaging Protocol said we're going to reduce amount of packaging waste by 50% by the year 2000. And then in 1996, they made a great announcement that they'd achieved it already and wasn't everything wonderful. The problem was that the only criteria was the weight of packaging. And what that meant is that we moved from much more recyclable but somewhat heavier weight packaging to lightweight plastic containers, such as the containers that Rod was showing a few minutes ago, that are not recyclable in many cases, particularly in the food business, because they're multi-layer plastics, which are extremely difficult to handle in a recycling plant. So we can't just talk about waste. We've got to talk, the word I use is environmental footprint. I think we've got to look at all the aspects of a product or a package or product and package together and do everything we can to minimize the environmental footprint and maximize the recyclability.
Perfect. Bernie?
2 things I'll leave with you. One is we can't work in a silo. We have to work outside of that silo. We have to work together. The second one is that, and I'm going to lose it here. I'll leave it at that. I can't even remember the other.
Well, it's a good note to leave it on.
We can't continue to work in a silo. Yes, the other one is remember the law of unintended consequences.
Paul?
And I'd like to leave a comment that caught my attention this morning. I want to make first of all a comment that I thought the sessions today and the breakout sessions and everything else were fantastic. I mean, the enthusiasm, the energy, the discussion was first rate, and the staff, or the GVRDs, Metro Vancouver coordinators, to be congratulated for really organizing something like that. I couldn't help but looking back, though, at one of the comments, I can't remember who the presenter was, talked about the 3 R's or 5 R's that they were, and at the very top they had a new R that I hadn't seen before, and it was called Rethink. And one of the most important things that happens here that ties into that rethink is the discussion amongst people, the ideas that are shared. That leads to rethinking, and I believe that that drives innovation, and I believe that drives the green economy. So it's not so much what happens today, this is the seed, but 6 months from now there's going to be innovation. Somebody will find a better way to make a product or a better way to apply a service, and that will go to overcoming a lot of the barriers identified.
Absolutely. Rod, any final thoughts?
You guys want to get a bit radical, you can send anything to your member of parliament for free, right? It's the law. This is a peel and stick label, and it's addressed to the Minister of the Environment and the Minister of the Industry. We need to get this material out of the blue box and get it into the mailbox. I have some of these available, unlimited numbers, for anyone who'd like to take a couple. The next time you come across a piece of packaging that's not recyclable, no recycled content, and is, to begin with, far too large, I'd encourage you to slap one on it. I've got plenty here for people to take with them. Get a bit radical on this, folks.
We've got a couple of garbage bags brought by the kids from Anmore.
I got lots of stickers. I got my eye on that bag. Thanks, Mayor.
Colin, some final thoughts?
I think that Rod's right in a way. Not going to endorse the strategy necessarily, but we've absolutely got to engage. Okay, I'll take one. We've absolutely got to engage all levels of government. This isn't something that one government or one neighborhood or one community can do by itself, but there is a role for all of us to play as individuals and organizations. And if you belong to an organization or you're part of a community that isn't doing what it could be doing, then pick up the leadership role and help make it happen.
Excellent. Neil?
My only regret is that Johnny Carline isn't here today. At least I don't think, unless Johnny...
No, he is very sick.
Because I think he would be exceptionally proud of what his staff, both elected and unelected, have been able to generate today. I think he would have been proud of the quality of the discussion. He would have been proud of the practicality of much of the discussion. And I think the legacy from today creates a huge set of shoes now to be filled by what you do next, Greg.
Absolutely. Can we give a round of applause for our Dragon's Den? So that brings us to a conclusion here today. We went over just a little bit, and I do apologize for that, but we had such a good discussion here, I didn't want to cut it short. So thank you so much for showing up today. Before you do go, I do want to say thank you to all the Metro Vancouver staff. Yeah, if we could give them a round of applause. So, as I said to you earlier, it was this idea that we had that we said we'd start it small and then it got bigger and then it sold out really quick. So I said, hey, let's live stream it. So I told the committee we were going to live stream it, and then it made the staff actually live stream it. But they did just such a phenomenal job. All of the people over here and all of the people that facilitated, it really was just awesome. And so thank you for all of your time that you spent with us today. And I just want to remind you that this is just the beginning of the process. This isn't the end. This isn't the end of the strategy. We're going to take back all of the information. We're going to continue the dialogue online at metrovancouver.org. We're going to continue engaging you. We're going to try to encourage everybody to speak together. And I'm sure we'll be back here soon talking about the next step of how we do more implementation. Have a great day, and thank you so much. Thanks.